The handcuffs closed with a clean metal snap that did not belong in a church. It landed in the middle of a fellowship hall filled with casseroles, foil trays, paper plates, and the soft afterglow that usually follows a Sunday service. The sound was small, but it carried. It made heads turn. It made forks pause in midair. It made a room full of people realize all at once that safety was not guaranteed just because the walls had scripture on them. Harold Price stood near the kitchen doorway with his wrists pulled behind him, shoulders steady, face tight in the way a person's face gets when they are trying to stay inside their own body. Not defiant, not dramatic, controlled, because uncontrolled never helped anyone who looked like him. The younger officer kept a firm grip on Harold's arm, guiding him as if the building itself might turn hostile. The older officer hovered to the side, eyes moving around the room, taking in the stunned expressions, the children who had stopped running, the women in aprons with serving spoons still in their hands. A white woman stood a few steps away with her phone in her hand, posture rigid, chin lifted. She looked satisfied and scared at the same time, like a person who had pulled a lever and now wanted to pretend the machine moved on its own. Harold had been an usher at New Hope Baptist long enough to know how quickly a normal moment can turn into a crisis. He had guided people through panic attacks, fainting spells, sudden grief. He had stood between arguments and elderly pride. He had carried folding chairs and carried burdens. He had quietly solved problems before they became stories. He had never imagined the problem would be him. Earlier that day, everything had been ordinary in the best way. The sanctuary service ended with familiar rhythms and familiar faces. A bright spring light spilled through the windows and made dust float like confetti. The pastor's closing prayer brought the room down gently, then released it back into life. People moved toward the fellowship hall with that slow, happy momentum, talking in clusters, checking on one another, asking about family, laughing softly, comparing dishes. The potluck at New Hope was not a casual meal. It was a system. It ran on tradition and timing. It ran on volunteers who knew which table needed more napkins and which corner needed more space. It ran on a kitchen that could turn out food for a crowd without anyone getting burned or slipping on a spill. Harold's role was simple and constant. He kept the doors moving. He kept the lines smooth. He kept the kitchen protected, not because the kitchen was secret, but because it was dangerous when it got crowded. Hot pans, sharp knives, wet floors, people stepping backward without looking. A busy kitchen could punish a careless moment. He stood at the doorway where the fellowship hall met the kitchen corridor. Full view of both. Hands visible. Voice low. A nod to one person, a gentle redirect for another, a quick glance to the volunteer coordinator to confirm that the next tray was coming out. It was the kind of work that looked like nothing when done well. It was also the kind of work that prevented disaster. A new visitor arrived just after the first serving rush. She did not look lost. She did not look shy. She did not look like a person searching for a seat or a plate. Her eyes moved too fast. Her posture was too stiff. She carried a large tote bag that looked expensive and heavy, the kind of bag people use when they intend to keep their hands free. She walked past the dessert table without slowing down. She ignored the line. She did not stop to greet anyone. She moved straight toward the kitchen corridor. Harold noticed, of course. He noticed everything in that doorway. He did not assume bad intent immediately. People wandered into the wrong place all the time. Churches welcomed strangers, and strangers sometimes walked like they had a destination, even when they did not. He stepped a half pace to the side, enough to be seen, not enough to block. The visitor pushed through the swinging kitchen door anyway. The kitchen was at peak heat. Volunteers in aprons moved around each other in tight lanes. Trays came out of warmers. A sink ran constantly. The floor had been mopped twice already, and it still threatened to get slick again. Harold followed at a calm pace and stopped at the threshold. He kept distance. He angled his body so his hands stayed visible. He spoke in a tone that belonged in a church, not in a confrontation. The kitchen was volunteer only during service events. Safety reasons. Too crowded. Too hot. The visitor turned sharply. Her face tightened, as if she had been insulted by the idea of a boundary. She waved her phone slightly, not recording, not yet, but ready. Harold remained steady. He asked one basic question, the kind any responsible person would ask if someone claimed official authority. The visitor claimed she was with the city and needed to check health standards. Harold did not accuse her of lying. He did not debate. He asked for identification. The room shifted on that exact moment, the way air shifts before a storm. The visitor's voice rose and hardened. She moved closer, then stopped, then raised her arm and made it seem like Harold was the one advancing. It was a small performance, but it was practiced. Her eyes scanned quickly, checking who was watching, measuring the audience. Harold stepped back again, palms open, letting the room see the distance. The visitor announced that Harold was threatening her. It did not match the reality in front of everyone. It did not match Harold's posture. It did not match his voice. It did not match the kitchen staff who had known him for years. But the words did not need to match reality to do damage. They only needed to trigger a response. The visitor left the kitchen corridor and walked into the fellowship hall with her phone to her ear. Her voice carried, not a whisper, not a private concern, a public call meant to shape the room's perception before anyone could correct it. A few people tried to speak up. The volunteer coordinator, Rochelle, moved toward her with a hand lifted in a calming gesture. One of the older deacons started toward the corridor to find the pastor. Harold did not chase the visitor into the hall. He did not argue in the open. He did not raise his voice. He moved toward the pastor's office because structure mattered and witnesses mattered, and the fastest way to lose control of a narrative was to yell inside it. Within minutes, the police arrived. 2 cars pulled into the lot, not speeding, but urgent enough. Doors opened, radios murmured. The sound of boots on pavement carried through the entryway. The officers entered the fellowship hall and scanned the room. Their eyes landed on Harold quickly because he was the only person standing near the corridor, the only person not holding a plate, the only black man positioned like a gatekeeper in a mostly white visitor's story. The visitor approached the officers and spoke rapidly. Her hands moved. Her face showed alarm. She kept glancing back toward Harold. The younger officer's posture tightened, the way posture tightens when someone is told there is a threat nearby. The older officer's eyes moved from the visitor to Harold to the room, taking in the normal church scene that did not match an emergency. The officers moved toward Harold anyway. Harold stayed where he was. He kept his hands visible. He did not step into their space. He did not retreat either, because retreat can look like guilt when people already want it to. The younger officer asked for identification and asked about weapons. The questions were routine, but the tone was not. The younger man's voice carried suspicion like a tool. Harold complied. He gave his name, his address, his identification. He kept his voice even and low. He tried to explain that the visitor entered a volunteer-only kitchen area and refused to show identification after claiming official authority. The officers did not interview the kitchen volunteers first. They did not ask the volunteer coordinator what happened. They did not ask the pastor, who had finally arrived at the end of the corridor, eyes wide with disbelief. The younger officer made a quick decision. Harold was instructed to turn around. The visitor held her phone up slightly as if she wanted a record. Harold turned slowly. Then the handcuffs snapped shut. The entire fellowship hall felt different. The smell of food remained. The bright light remained. The tablecloths remained. But the warmth was punctured. The event became a scene. Children stared. A few elders shook their heads slowly, as if unable to accept what their eyes were showing. The kitchen volunteers went still. Spoons and tongs paused. Hot food suddenly unimportant. Harold's wrists burned immediately, not from force, but from the humiliation of being treated like a danger in a place he had protected for years. Pastor Daniel Williams stepped forward and held his hands low, palms visible, voice controlled. He did not challenge the officers with emotion. He approached it like a procedure. New Hope had security cameras in the kitchen and hallway. The cameras captured the corridor. The cameras captured the kitchen doorway. The footage could show exactly what happened. The older officer's expression changed at the mention of cameras. The younger officer looked irritated, like the existence of proof was an inconvenience. The visitor dismissed the idea quickly and insisted that her fear mattered more than any recording. She framed it as a feeling that could not be disproven. The older officer did not accept that framing. He asked for the pastor to show the footage. Harold felt a small relief, but it was not complete. A relief was not an outcome. A relief was simply the chance to fight. The older officer asked the younger officer to wait. The younger officer did not remove the cuffs. Harold remained restrained while the room watched. That detail mattered. That detail stayed in people's bodies. It taught everyone that a black man could be cuffed in a church and still need to earn his innocence. Pastor Williams led them through the corridor to a small office behind the kitchen where a wall-mounted monitor displayed camera feeds. A volunteer named Marcus ran the system during events and handled archived footage. Marcus was young, serious, careful. The kind of young man who learned early to keep the technical side clean, because the technical side could become the only language authorities believed. Marcus pulled up the timeline and rewound to the moment the visitor entered. The footage showed the visitor pushing through the kitchen door first, moving inside quickly, not looking lost, not asking anyone for help. It showed Harold at the threshold, body angled away, hands visible, holding distance. It showed Harold stepping back when the visitor's body language sharpened. It showed the visitor raising her voice while Harold remained measured. It showed Harold turning away and walking toward the pastor's office instead of following the visitor. Then it showed the visitor leaving the corridor and walking into the fellowship hall to make the call. The hallway camera captured Harold's position and the distance. It captured Harold's retreat. It captured the way the visitor pointed. It captured the officers entering. It captured the cuffs going on. The older officer watched the screen without blinking. The younger officer glanced at it, then looked away, then looked back, as if he wanted a different story to appear. The visitor was not in the office, but her story was. It sat in the report that had already been started. It sat in the way the younger officer had already framed Harold in his mind. It sat in the assumptions that entered a room before evidence did. The older officer instructed the younger officer to remove the cuffs. The younger officer hesitated, then unlocked them. Harold rubbed his wrists slowly. The red marks were visible. The sting made him feel both angry and tired. The older officer returned to the fellowship hall with the pastor and asked the visitor to provide identification for her claim of being a city inspector. The visitor could not produce it. She shifted her explanation. She claimed she did not need to show identification. She claimed she was checking something on behalf of a friend. She claimed she was a concerned citizen. Each new version pulled her further from the authority she had used to enter the kitchen. The older officer asked the visitor to step outside. The younger officer remained inside and looked around the fellowship hall, eyes avoiding Harold. Harold thought for a moment that the worst had passed. He was wrong. The older officer returned a few minutes later with a different tone. The visitor's call had been logged as a threat complaint. The dispatch record existed. The officers had responded. A report would be filed. The report would include the initial allegation because that was procedure. The report would not automatically erase itself because the cameras told a different story. Harold understood instantly why that mattered. A report with the word threat attached to his name could spread beyond the church. It could show up in a background check. It could show up in a traffic stop. It could show up in a future misunderstanding and turn it into something dangerous. Harold had a job during the week as a building maintenance supervisor for a local school district. He had keys. He had access badges. He was trusted to move through spaces where children were present. Any suggestion of aggression, any hint of an incident with police could trigger administrative review. Not because the district was cruel, but because districts were built to protect themselves first. Harold had 2 grandkids he helped pick up after school some days. If he ended up labeled as a danger, even incorrectly, it could change those routines. He felt the injustice sharpen. A false call was not just a moment, it was a stain that could spread. Pastor Williams asked what could be done to correct the record. The older officer explained that the report would reflect what happened as verified by video, but it would still include the original allegation because that was part of the call history. The officer advised Harold to request the report later and follow the procedure to file a supplemental statement or complaint if needed. Harold heard the word procedure and felt the familiar weight. Procedures protected systems. People had to fight to fit inside them. The visitor was not arrested on the spot. The older officer warned her about making false reports and about trespass if she returned, but he did not handcuff her. Harold noticed that too. He noticed the asymmetry. He noticed how the system was cautious about punishing the person who made the call, even when proof showed the call was wrong. The police left. The potluck tried to continue. People forced themselves back toward plays and gonbasais, but their eyes kept drifting to Harold. Not suspicion, worry, anger, a feeling of being violated inside their own building. Harold smiled a few times because he knew people needed to see him steady. He shook hands. He patted shoulders. He told others it was fine, even though it was not fine. He stayed for cleanup because that was who he was. He folded chairs, he carried trash bags, he wiped tables, but his wrists kept burning. By evening, the fellowship hall was empty. The lights buzzed softly. The smell of food had turned into the smell of cleaning spray. The last volunteer left with tired feet and a stiff back. Harold sat alone in the sanctuary for a moment, hands resting on his knees, breathing slow. He tried to play the day back in his head in the way his mind always did after something went wrong. What could have been prevented? What should have been said differently? What angle could have reduced the risk? He kept returning to one fact. Without the cameras, he would have gone to jail. That night, Harold slept poorly. Not because he feared the visitor returning, he feared the record. The next morning, he called his supervisor at the district and disclosed the incident in plain terms. He kept it simple. There had been a false complaint. Police responded. He was briefly restrained. Video cleared him. There were no charges. He wanted the district to hear it from him first. His supervisor listened and told him the right things. Gratitude for transparency. Support. A promise to check whether any administrative step was required. Harold felt a small release, then a new tension, because promises were not policy. Policies lived in paperwork. Paperwork lived in files. Later that same morning, Kendra Lewis, the church administrator, called Harold and told him the visitor had posted about the incident in a local neighborhood group. The post framed the story as a scary experience. It described a dangerous man in the church. It implied the church was unsafe. It did not mention that the visitor entered a restricted kitchen corridor. It did not mention that cameras cleared Harold. It did not mention that the police removed the cuffs after seeing footage. The post did what those posts always did. It moved faster than truth. Harold felt his stomach drop again. Reputation blast. Not in theory, in practice. Within hours, a few people had shared the post. Some comments defended Harold because they knew him. Some comments expressed concern and suggested the church should hire security. Some comments, from people who did not know him, treated the accusation as enough. Harold did not respond publicly. He understood how public debates worked. They rewarded heat, not accuracy. The right move was evidence, not argument. Pastor Williams met with the deacons and key volunteers that afternoon. They discussed what happened and what would happen next. They also discussed a new problem. New Hope's camera system was functional, but it was not designed as an evidence vault. The storage rotated. Footage overwrote itself after a short retention window. Marcus had told them the system typically stored about a week of continuous video before rewriting over old files, depending on motion activity and resolution. A week sounded like a long time until it did not. If Harold wanted to preserve the footage for his own protection, and if the church wanted to preserve it for legal reasons, they had to export it quickly. That became the new urgency. Harold returned to the church that evening. Marcus met him in the office with a laptop and a thumb drive. Kendra brought a binder with incident notes, not dramatic, just factual. Time of call, arrival of police, officer names, the visitor's description, the location of cameras. They treated it like an investigation because that was what it had become. Marcus exported the relevant clips: kitchen corridor camera, fellowship hall entry camera, hallway camera near the pastor's office. He included a few minutes before the visitor entered and a few minutes after the police left, so the clip could not be accused of selective trimming. Marcus saved the files with clear names and timestamps. He created an additional copy and stored it on a separate external drive kept by the church. Kendra wrote down who handled the footage and when. She noted the method used to export it, the device used to store it, and the storage location. Chain of custody was not a fancy phrase anymore. It was Harold's shield. Harold left that night with a copy of the footage and a folder containing his own notes of the event. He drove home slowly, hands steady on the wheel, eyes scanning his mirrors more often than usual, because after a false call, everything felt like it could become another call. 2 days later, Harold requested the police report. He did it the correct way. He followed the department's procedure for records requests, filled out the form, provided identification, and waited. Waiting was part of the punishment. When the report arrived, it came as a summary with standard language. It included the dispatch category of threat complaint. It included the visitor's initial allegation. It included a brief note that video evidence did not support the claim of physical aggression and that the complainant could not provide city identification. The report also included a phrase that made Harold's jaw tighten. It described Harold's demeanor as tense. Tense was not a crime. Tense was not a threat. Tense was also the kind of word that could be read wrong later by someone looking for justification. Harold did not rage. He did not call and scream. He did not post online. He did what he had learned to do in systems that loved paperwork. He corrected the record. He filed a supplemental statement through the department, attaching a brief written summary and requesting that the statement be appended to the report. He referenced the existence of security footage and offered to provide it through official channels if needed. He requested the body-worn camera footage from the responding officers as well, because the body cam would show how quickly the report shifted once the church cameras were viewed. The department confirmed receipt. Confirmation did not equal action, but it was a step. The visitor did not disappear. She returned to the neighborhood group with a new post, claiming the church had threatened her and that she feared retaliation. She suggested she had been bullied. She framed herself as the victim of a community that was protecting a dangerous man. The narrative evolved, as false narratives do. When facts appear, the story shifts to feelings. This time, Pastor Williams responded carefully and formally, not with opinion, but with procedure. The church issued a statement to its members, reminding everyone that the kitchen corridor was volunteer only during events for safety, and that anyone claiming official inspection authority must check in with the administrator and show credentials. It stated that the church had reviewed footage and found that the allegation of threat was not supported. It stated that the church was cooperating with law enforcement regarding the false report. It didn't name the visitor publicly. It didn't inflame the post. It simply anchored the truth in a sober tone. Harold appreciated that. He also knew that statements rarely stopped people who wanted a story to spread. A week after the incident, Harold's supervisor at the district called him back. The district's Human Resources Department had received an anonymous email referencing the police visit at New Hope and raising concerns about Harold's suitability for work around schools. The email did not accuse him of a specific crime. It used vague language. It suggested risk. It asked whether the district had checked. Harold felt the danger become tangible. This was the domino effect. This was the real weapon. Not the cuffs in the fellowship hall, but the slow, bureaucratic reach that could take away his job through suspicion alone. The district asked for documentation. Harold provided the church footage and the police report supplement request. He asked Pastor Williams for a letter confirming Harold's long-standing role, the church's review of footage, and the fact that the allegation was not supported. The district said they would review and respond. Harold went to work the next morning anyway, because going to work was part of staying alive in a system that loved to test whether you would collapse. He walked through fluorescent hallways, checked boiler readings, signed off on work orders, monitored alarms. He moved like a professional. He kept his mind quiet, but his body stayed tense. 2 days later, the district informed Harold that they were placing him on temporary administrative leave while they completed a review. Administrative leave sounded gentle. It was not gentle. It was a stoppage. It was a hint of distrust. It was a pause on income and dignity. Harold's hands shook slightly when he read the email. Asha, his wife, read it and went still. She did not cry. She didn't explode. She turned quiet in a way that made Harold feel older instantly. They had built a life on routine, on the reliability of his job, on the predictability of being a man who did his work and went home. One false call had now reached into their Monday. Harold's first instinct was to shrink, to stay invisible, to keep his head down and hope the system corrected itself quietly. The second instinct, slower but stronger, was to fight. Pastor Williams connected Harold with an attorney named Vanessa Carter, a civil rights lawyer known in the area for handling cases involving false reports and institutional overreach. Vanessa did not promise miracles. She promised process. Vanessa reviewed the footage. She reviewed the police report. She reviewed Harold's supplemental statement request. She reviewed the neighborhood posts. She asked for the details that mattered. Which officers responded, what dispatch category was used, whether the visitor had been formally trespassed, whether any criminal complaint was pending, whether the district had given Harold a written reason for leave. Vanessa also asked a question that Harold did not want to hear because it sounded too sharp. Was the visitor after something? Harold had assumed it was about power and bias. That could be enough. It often was. But Vanessa's question implied a more specific intent. The footage was re-watched with a different eye. In the kitchen clip, the visitor did not behave like a person inspecting food safety. She did not look at sink stations. She did not check temperatures. She did not ask volunteers about gloves. She moved toward the back corner where the church kept a small office door leading to supply storage and administrative files. That office door was kept locked during events. The visitor approached it, tested the handle, then turned when she realized Harold was watching. Harold had not noticed that detail in the chaos of the moment. He had been focused on keeping distance and staying calm. He had not assumed theft. Vanessa noticed. Marcus pulled an additional camera angle from the hallway outside the supply office. The angle was not perfect, but it showed the visitor lingering at the door for several seconds, shifting her tote bag on her shoulder, looking around, then moving away. Vanessa explained why that mattered. If the visitor's intent included unauthorized access, the false threat claim could be a cover, a diversion, a way to remove the person who blocked her from reaching what she wanted. That possibility made the story sharper and more dangerous. It also gave Harold a different kind of protection. If the visitor had been attempting theft or unauthorized access, then her false report was not just mistaken. It was functional. Vanessa recommended a formal request to the department to investigate the false report and to review body-worn camera and dispatch audio. She also recommended that the church trespass the visitor formally in writing and preserve all footage. Pastor Williams agreed. The church administrator served the trespass notice through proper channels. Certified mail. Clear language. Clear boundary. No drama. Vanessa drafted a letter to the district. The letter included a factual timeline, the existence of video evidence, the lack of charges, and the ongoing request for body cam and dispatch records. It asked the district to treat the anonymous email as an unreliable complaint unless and until verified evidence indicated risk. The district acknowledged the letter. Harold waited again. During that waiting, another urgency emerged. The department's body cam footage retention policy was limited. Video was not stored forever. Depending on the classification of the incident, footage could be archived for a set period, then purged unless flagged. If the incident was categorized as non-criminal and closed quickly, the retention could be short. Harold needed that body cam. The church footage showed the kitchen and corridor. The body cam would show the officer's tone, the decision to cuff, the decision to keep him restrained while checking cameras, and the moment the report shifted. That mattered for the district's review. It mattered for correcting the police record. It mattered for preventing the neighborhood narrative from calcifying. Vanessa moved faster. She filed a public records request for body-worn camera footage and dispatch audio tied to the incident. She also sent a preservation letter to the department requesting that all recordings related to the incident be preserved due to anticipated litigation. Preservation letters were a kind of time machine. They did not change what happened, but they stopped evidence from disappearing before anyone could prove it. The department confirmed receipt of the preservation request. Again, confirmation did not equal compliance, but it was a step. Meanwhile, the visitors' posts continued. A local blog picked it up. A short piece, light on facts, heavy on implication. A dangerous man at a church event. Police involved. Community concern. Harold did not want his name in that kind of story. The blog did not use his name, but the neighborhood did not need a name. It needed an image. It needed a target. One afternoon, Harold returned to New Hope to help with a midweek community dinner. He hesitated at the kitchen corridor. He felt the hallway tighten around him, even though nothing was happening. Rochelle noticed and gently redirected him to a different task. Not because she doubted him, but because she cared about his nervous system. She understood what it meant to carry a false accusation like a weight. Harold appreciated the care. He also resented needing it. That resentment did not turn into bitterness. It turned into determination. Vanessa advised a deliberate strategy. First, secure and preserve all evidence: church footage, body cam, dispatch audio, police report, supplemental statement, neighborhood posts, and any anonymous email to the district. Second, force the story into formal settings where evidence mattered. Internal affairs review for the cuffing decision, district review for employment status, and potentially a criminal complaint for false reporting and attempted trespass. Third, avoid public brawls. Let the record speak. Weeks passed with the slow grind of process. The district scheduled a formal meeting with Harold. The meeting included human resources, a security liaison, and Harold's supervisor. Vanessa joined by phone. Pastor Williams provided a written statement. The church administrator provided the footage file, hashes, and chain of custody notes. In the meeting, Harold described the event in plain terms without dramatizing. He described the kitchen boundary, the request for identification, the false complaint, the cuffing, the cameras, and the immediate clearing by footage. He described the impact on his body and his work, but he did not appeal to sympathy. He appealed to facts. The district asked if police had filed charges. No. The district asked if the visitor had identification. No. The district asked if the video showed threat behavior. No. The district asked why he was cuffed. Because the officer treated the complaint as credible until proven otherwise. That answer made the district uncomfortable. It made them look at their own procedures. The district paused, then requested the body cam footage if it could be obtained to support their file. Vanessa assured them it was requested and preserved. After the meeting, the district kept Harold on leave pending final documentation. Harold's savings took hits, small hits, then deeper ones. Usher took extra shifts. Harold cut expenses. They stayed quiet and careful, which felt like living in a smaller house than the one they owned. Pastor Williams offered financial assistance from the church benevolence fund, but Harold declined at first. Pride was not stubbornness for him. Pride was survival. Pride was the thing that kept him from feeling like he had been reduced to a problem. Usher convinced him to accept a small amount, not as charity, but as solidarity. The church had been the scene of the injustice. The church could also be a shield. Harold accepted. Then the department released the body cam footage. The footage arrived with redactions in certain areas, but the critical sequence remained. The body cam showed the visitor's emotional performance at the entrance. It showed the younger officer's posture change. It showed Harold standing near the corridor with his hands visible. It showed Harold complying. It showed the instruction to turn around. It showed the cuffs applied. It also showed the older officer's hesitation. It showed him scanning the room. It showed the pastor approaching with calm authority and mentioning cameras. It showed the officers walking back to review footage. It showed the moment the older officer directed the cuffs to be removed. The body cam captured a key procedural detail. The younger officer kept Harold restrained while the cameras were reviewed despite the lack of visible threat. That detail mattered. It showed that the restraint was not a response to behavior in the moment. It was a response to the complaint category and the assumptions attached to it. Vanessa requested an internal affairs review of the officer's decision to restrain Harold in a crowded public church without verifying facts first. The department did not commit publicly to discipline. Departments rarely did. But they opened a file. The dispatch audio arrived next. It contained the initial call description. It contained the category. It contained the language used to frame Harold before officers arrived. Vanessa noted that dispatch language often shaped officer response. The more severe the call category, the less room officers felt they had to pause. That did not excuse the decision. It explained the pipeline. Vanessa filed a complaint on Harold's behalf regarding the false report and requested investigation of the visitor's identity and motives. The department identified the visitor quickly because she had called from her own phone and had provided a name during follow-up. Her name was Cynthia Blake. The department contacted Cynthia and requested a formal statement. Cynthia maintained that she felt threatened. She maintained that Harold's presence and tone made her fear for safety. The department asked why she entered a restricted kitchen corridor and why she claimed to be with the city. Cynthia shifted again. She claimed she had been invited to check on cleanliness by a friend. The department asked for the friend's name. Cynthia did not provide it. Vanessa pressed for more. She provided the church footage. She provided the hallway clip showing Cynthia testing the locked office door. She suggested that Cynthia's motives might include attempted access to church administrative areas. The department treated that as significant and referred the matter to a detective for follow-up. It became a different kind of case now, not just a false report. A possible attempt to access secured areas of a building under the cover of authority. The detective requested additional information from the church: layout of the corridor, access procedures, what was stored in the locked office during events, whether cash or donation envelopes were present. Kendra explained the procedure. During potlucks, some donations were collected in a lockbox after service and moved to the administrative office. Volunteers also stored supply keys in a locked cabinet. The office door remained locked and was accessed by staff only. The detective asked whether anyone had noticed missing items. Kendra reviewed the inventory and did not initially note missing supplies. The lockbox had not been accessed by unauthorized individuals. Still, the footage of Cynthia testing the office door remained suspicious. The detective asked Marcus to provide the raw footage file and metadata. Marcus and Kendra delivered it. Chain of custody notes were included. File hashes were documented. The detective signed a receipt. Harold watched the transfer and felt something odd. Relief, because the truth was finally being handled formally. Also anger, because the system needed this level of documentation to treat him like a person. The neighborhood narrative continued to leak into the real world. A local community watch page reposted the blog story. People who did not attend New Hope discussed it like entertainment. They speculated. They used coded language about safety. Harold's name did not appear, but the church name did. The church's reputation was being dragged for telling the truth about an incident that should never have happened. Pastor Williams decided to address it with a public statement on the church's website and social media pages. The statement was short, factual, calm. It stated that a false accusation occurred. It stated that church security footage documented the sequence and cleared the usher. It stated that law enforcement reviewed the footage and removed restraints. It stated that the visitor had been trespassed. It stated that the church was cooperating with investigation. No personal attacks, no emotional language, just the record. That kind of statement did not satisfy people who wanted drama. It did something better. It stabilized the narrative for those who were willing to listen. Then the case took another turn. The detective discovered that Cynthia Blake was not a random visitor with a fragile temperament. She had a prior incident at another community center involving claims of official authority and a confrontation when asked for identification. The prior incident did not lead to charges, but it generated documentation. It generated pattern. Pattern recognition was the hinge of this whole story. The detective requested permission from the district attorney's office to pursue a charge of filing a false report and possibly attempted unlawful entry, depending on evidence. The district attorney's office asked for a clear timeline and clear proof of intent. Vanessa understood the importance of intent. She worked with the detective to frame the evidence appropriately. The footage did not show Cynthia physically breaking into the office. It showed Cynthia testing the door and shifting her tote bag. That could be interpreted as curiosity or as something else. Intent needed more. The detective requested Cynthia's phone records around the time of the incident, specifically the emergency call and any subsequent communications with anyone connected to New Hope. A subpoena was sought. The court approved it. Phone records revealed something that changed the case. Cynthia had exchanged messages with someone who attended New Hope sporadically, a person who had previously volunteered once or twice and knew the kitchen corridor layout. The detective interviewed that person. The person admitted that Cynthia had asked about donation handling procedures and whether cash was kept in the building after service. The person claimed the conversation was casual and did not believe Cynthia intended theft. Casual conversations about cash in churches were not normal. The district attorney's office treated it as significant. Now there was context. Motive did not need to be proven beyond doubt to proceed. It needed to be plausible and supported by evidence. The district attorney filed charges, not for theft, not for assault, for filing a false report and making a false statement to law enforcement, and for trespass after notice. The trespass charge was based on Cynthia's return to the church property once after the incident, a return captured on exterior camera. Cynthia had come by during a weekday afternoon as if to test whether anyone would stop her. Kendra had documented the visit and notified law enforcement. Cynthia was arrested quietly at her home after a warrant was issued. Not a dramatic raid. A controlled procedure. 2 officers. Calm instructions. Standard transport. Harold did not celebrate the arrest. He did not feel joy at someone else being restrained. He felt the heaviness of the fact that it took a criminal charge against the complainant for the system to correct itself, while Harold's restraint required no warrant at all. The district watched the case evolve. Harold's administrative leave remained in place pending outcome. Vanessa pushed the district to restore Harold's position based on the existing evidence, not on the future court date. Harold could not live in limbo while the legal system processed someone else's wrongdoing. The district agreed to reinstate Harold with a written memo clarifying that the incident did not involve criminal conduct by Harold and that video evidence contradicted the initial allegation. The memo stated that the district would monitor the case but had no basis to restrict Harold's duties. Harold returned to work on a Monday and walked through the school building with the same steady steps as always. But something inside him remained altered. He noticed how quickly rumors traveled. He noticed how easily a false label could attach itself. He noticed how important it was to have records ready. He also noticed how many colleagues quietly treated him with extra gentleness, like they were afraid to remind him of what happened. Harold appreciated their care, and he also hated needing it. The court date arrived weeks later. Harold did not want to attend. Part of him wanted distance. Another part needed to see the system acknowledge what had happened. Vanessa advised him to be present, not as vengeance, as witness. Harold entered the courthouse with Pastor Williams and Kendra. Rochelle came too. Marcus came because he had exported the footage and understood that he had played a role in keeping the truth alive. They sat in a courtroom that smelled faintly of old paper and floor polish. The air was dry. The lights were harsh. The tone was not moral. It was procedural. Cynthia Blake stood at the defendant table in clean clothes, posture stiff, eyes scanning the room. She looked smaller here than she had looked in the church. The prosecutor presented the case clearly. A false report led to police restraint of an innocent person. The allegation was contradicted by security footage, and the complainant's shifting statements showed a lack of credibility. The prosecutor also presented the trespass notice and Cynthia's return to the property after notice. Vanessa did not need to speak. Harold was not the one on trial. Still, Harold felt every sentence like it was pulling a weight off his chest. The judge asked questions. The judge asked why Cynthia claimed official authority. The judge asked why she entered a restricted corridor. The judge asked why she refused to provide identification when asked. The judge asked why she persisted with her allegation after video evidence contradicted it. Cynthia attempted to explain it as fear and misunderstanding. She attempted to describe feelings that could not be disproven. The judge focused on actions and records. Fear did not authorize false statements. Feelings did not justify a false emergency call. Misunderstanding did not explain a claim of being with the city. Cynthia accepted a plea agreement. The plea included community service, fines, and a formal no-contact order with New Hope and with Harold. The plea also included a condition that Cynthia not enter the church property in the future and that she complete a program related to false reporting. The judge issued the sentence with a tone that made it clear this was not a small thing. False calls diverted resources. False claims endangered people. False stories had consequences. Harold listened and felt a strange split. Part of him felt relief. Another part felt how little the system had to do to repair what it had done to him. A fine for Cynthia. Community service. A program. Meanwhile, Harold had lived under a threat label, lost work time, lost income, lost sleep, and lost the sense that his church was a sanctuary from the outside world. After court, Harold stood outside the courthouse and watched Cynthia walk away with her attorney, head down. Harold did not approach her. He did not want a confrontation. He did not want a story to spread that he had harassed her, even now. He wanted closure, not another angle for someone to weaponize. Vanessa suggested one more step, an official correction letter. Vanessa requested that the police department add a formal notation to the incident report reflecting that video evidence contradicted the threat allegation and that the complainant had been charged for false reporting based on the same incident. The department agreed to attach an addendum. This mattered, not for public opinion, but for future record searches, for future encounters. For the next time an officer pulled up Harold's name and saw a prior incident, that addendum would be the difference between suspicion and context. The church also took action. Pastor Williams and the deacons approved upgrades to the camera system. Better storage, longer retention, easier export procedures, a formal policy for preserving footage when incidents occurred. They implemented a check-in protocol for all visitors who claimed to be inspectors or officials. Any claim of official authority required a badge and an appointment with the administrator. They also trained volunteers on a specific procedure if police arrived. Designate one person to communicate. Designate one person to preserve video. Designate one person to record officer names and report numbers, and keep the scene calm. Not because they wanted to live in fear, because they wanted to protect their people from the world's shortcuts. Harold continued to serve as usher, but he adjusted his routines. He did not become paranoid. He became strategic. He positioned himself where cameras could see him. He made sure volunteers knew who was authorized. He stopped allowing unknown individuals to drift into back corridors without a friendly check. The congregation responded with a kind of quiet solidarity that did not require speeches. People greeted Harold with more intention. They thanked him more directly. They offered help more readily. Not pity, respect. One afternoon, Jaden, a teenager who volunteered in the kitchen, asked Harold what to do if someone tried to push past boundaries again. Harold gave a short answer, grounded in what the incident had taught him. Keep distance. Keep hands visible. Find a witness. Trigger procedure. Preserve the record. Harold did not call it survival. He did not call it injustice. He called it wisdom. Because sometimes wisdom was the only language young people could carry without becoming heavy too early. The neighborhood posts slowly died down, not because people became enlightened, but because the story lost oxygen once the official record existed, once the complainant was charged, once the church statement stayed calm, once the video reality could not be denied. Still, Harold noticed a change in who attended potlucks. Some unfamiliar white visitors stopped coming. They had come for a version of the church that included control. When that control failed, they moved elsewhere. New Hope did not miss them. The fellowship hall settled back into its usual rhythm, but it was a rhythm with a scar. Harold did not forget the handcuff snap. He did not forget the pause in the room. He did not forget the way a single phone call had transformed him from a deacon into a threat in the eyes of strangers. He also did not forget the cameras. The cameras did not speak with sound. They spoke with certainty. They spoke with angles and timestamps and distance. They spoke with an impartial memory the human world rarely offered. In quiet moments, Harold thought about how close it had been. If Marcus had not known how to export footage, the clip might have overwritten. If the church had not acted quickly, the evidence could have disappeared. If Pastor Williams had not demanded review, the officers might have taken Harold to the station and processed him before anyone saw truth. If the district had chosen caution over evidence, Harold could have lost his job. This was the part that made Harold's chest tighten. The truth did not win because it was true. The truth won because it was recorded, preserved, and presented properly. One Sunday after the case closed, New Hope held a potluck again. The kitchen ran like a system. Volunteers moved in rhythm. Children ran in safe lanes. The fellowship hall smelled like warm food and community. Harold stood at the kitchen doorway in his usual place, hands visible, posture calm. A new visitor approached the corridor, hesitated, and asked politely where to go. Harold guided the visitor toward the serving line with a smile that felt real. The church was not going to become a fortress. It was going to remain a church, but it would not remain naive. Later, as the last chairs were folded and the last trash bags tied off, Harold stepped into the empty sanctuary and sat for a moment in the quiet. The lights hummed softly. The air was still. The building felt like itself again. His wrists no longer burned. The memory remained, but it no longer controlled him. Harold stood, smoothed his suit jacket, and walked out through the doors he had held open for years. Outside, the evening was mild. The parking lot lights cast steady pools of brightness. Cars pulled away slowly. Harold looked back at the building once, then forward, then kept walking. The system had tried to turn him into a story. The cameras turned the story back into facts. And facts, preserved and delivered the right way, finally gave him back what the cuffs tried to take: his name, his work, his church, and his peace.